Hi all, this is Kevin Bernatz at Dr. Nuts Development. I'm going to do a video basically going over the intro scenario in Oceans of Fire. This is the Midway scenario. It's only one turn, so 4 rounds. If you've watched my other video on sort of an overview of Oceans. And it starts off after Japan has done their initial expansion, and it forces Japan to sort of expand a little bit further, and they start getting into interaction with the U.S. Navy, which is starting to build up at this point. You can see the starting setup here. So you have, Japan has landed in the Philippines, but not quite taken it yet. They're contesting contesting 2 of the 3 Philippine areas. They've taken most of British possessions. The brown circles you see, those are areas that are out of play in this scenario. I do want to comment that, I should have commented this in the other video, but all these components are playtest components, so they're not going to be the finished coloring or the finished map or anything like that. These are all purely playtest components. And so Japan has taken Rabaul and part of New Guinea, but they have not really expanded into the Solomons yet or pushed past Wake Island. You go through, you have carrier displays. Japan has quite a few carrier air available. The U.S. actually starting to get their carriers. They have 2 full-strength carriers, and that's where a lot of the interaction is going to come about, where the Japanese carriers are going to have to start worrying about the U.S. carriers. This is just a side showing of that portion of the map, and then the other half of the Pacific. This shows the reinforcements that are going to come in during the course of this turn. So Japan and America are going to get quite a few reinforcements coming on round 1. You can ignore the Chinese land-based air unit here. Actually, it's not in play in this scenario. Round 2, Japan will get a carrier. Round 3, the U.S. gets a carrier and a battleship. And then round 4, it's Japan gets the carrier and the U.S. gets another battleship coming in. So the first thing Japan does with their impulse, they determine the number of man points they have. They start actually with 16 total for the turn, which breaks down to 4 each per round. And the first thing they're going to try to do in this playtest is they're going to try to finish off the Philippines. So they activate a bunch of naval units, including some transports. They bring in some additional land units, and they declare an attack. They declare combat on Luzon. And you see it's marked as the areas in combat, and then the entire mixed area is marked in combat. And this will be important if you remember my overview video, that this is going to restrict Japanese movement through this mixed area after this combat is resolved. And that's fine. Japan is not going to perform any other operations in this area this round, and but if they wanted to, they would have had to move the additional units in before they actually resolve this combat. So if you look at Luzon, you have 3 Allied controlled units, 2 Philippine divisions and 1 American division. They're already been reduced from turn 1, and they are marked unsupplied level 2, which will reduce their defense strength. Japan has 2 divisions and a brigade, and then they're supporting with some battleships for shore bombardment. Ends up on the 5-to-1 plus column, and they rolled a big 10. If you noticed, even on, basically on all these columns, you have a attacker loss, defender loss. So even, your 5-to-1 column maximum roll, there's always attrition to the attacker. There's no rolls in oceans where the attacker doesn't suffer some loss. Now the effect is the Allies lose a total of 6 factors. They split it up this way, 2 on this unit, 3 on this unit, and 1 on the American division. I remember it's attack and defense, and the superscript is the troop quality. This is going to eliminate this unit. This is going to eliminate the other Philippine unit, and then the American unit will be left with basically a 2 attack and 2 defense after applying the 1 damage. Japan took 2 damage. This, I'm not sure if you remember, let me flip back. So this was the front side 8-8 with 2 damage. When it takes 2 more damage, it ends up at a 4-4 unit, which instead of marking it with a damage marker, you can just flip it over because the back is always basically half strength of a unit if it has a high enough factors. That effect is due to the retreat. The Japanese have taken control of Luzon. The Allied unit retreats here to Lady Samar. The control marker is flipped, but it's marked with a repairing. So Japan can't actually land naval units at the port yet. They can't use the full air capacity of the area until the space is done repairing, which will be at the start of the next round. The response. So the U.S. basically says, well, we're not quite in position to do anything to the Japanese, so we're going to start moving units from the U.S. box to reinforce Oahu. They could move some air over to Midway. Eventually they're going to want to get a land unit there. And then they start sending some additional land units to help bolster Australia and defend some of these areas. You see little numbers here on the playtest. Those are actually the victory points for these different areas. I don't have them printed on this copy of the playtest map. You saw in my other video, they're now printed on the map. We feel that having the victory points on the actual areas helps players or focus, where do they want to go next. So U.S. is sending units. In Australia, they're starting to try to garrison really the areas that are directly threatened by Japan. So Northern Territory gets a unit here, and Western Australia gets a unit. It's not a very strong unit, but it is at least a unit. And you can see there's still quite a few Australian and even some U.S. units in the high victory point areas of Australia. So, next round, Japan wants to finish off the Philippines, so they attack both Lady Samar and Mindanao. So remember, as I said, once this area becomes marked with a combat concluded, they won't be able to do anything in here. And so if they want to attack both of these, they have to plan both operations sort of simultaneously. And so they have a transport here that's going to land a unit to join this brigade in Mindanao, and then they're able to walk across the land straits from Luzon to Lady Samar, and they're supporting that with a battleship. And so here's Mindanao. You basically have essentially overwhelming strength, and then here's Lady Samar. It also essentially ends up in the 5-to-1 column. They roll, meaning this, and the effect is they've conquered both areas. Note that here the control marker is flipped but not marked repairing. That's because even if they rolled a 1, so the worst possible die roll, they would still have eliminated the defender. So that's called an overrun. We use that term, but it's not like a blitzkrieg type overrun. What it essentially means is you brought enough strength that there was no way for the defense to hold, and that allows you to immediately flip the control marker to its usable side as opposed to marking it repaired. So repaired is just a 1-turn delay before you can start using the port and the additional airfield capacity. The other thing Japan does on their round is activate down here to invade Western Australia. It's just a 2 defense strength unit. They bring in enough, including one of their elite 4 troop quality units, and they succeed in taking Western Australia, landing and holding Western Australia. U.S. response starts out by getting a land unit into Midway. Japan could intercept with their naval units here. You see one is a transport, the other is, I think there's 2 battleships here, if I remember. Air units, when they're on an island, can only intercept to another island in their area. So say from here to Kwajalein or to the Marshall Sea area portion. They cannot intercept to an adjacent area. Their interception range is limited. So even though Japan has some air that they would love to bring to intercept what the U.S. is doing in Midway, that they can't. And so since the U.S. brought carriers, Japan only has battleships. Don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Japan decided not to bother trying to intercept this move. There was some movement down in Australia to basically garrison against Japan expanding, and then we moved to round 3. So this is sort of the start of round 3. Japan controls all of the Philippines. They have secured all of this area. In New Guinea, you see there's 2 areas that are worth essentially half a victory point. I think Japan is sitting around 25 or 26 victory points at this juncture, and they need 29. And so I think they're at 26. I think they needed 3 victory points. So they have 1 victory point sitting here. It's essentially not defended at all. And then you have a victory point here in Southwest Australia, but you can see the Allied response has been to beef up, including the elite Australian unit. And then there's some victory points here. Papua is also worth a victory point, and it's only got a single weak defending unit there. And then Guadalcanal has a victory point, and Funafuti. And I think Samoa and New Caledonia also are worth victory points, but these are fairly heavily defended. So Japan has some options. They also have Midway, which is worth a potential 3 victory points if they're able to control it. So Japan is going to go after Midway. The name of the scenario, after all, right? So they come out with a land unit to invade. They escort with their carriers. The U.S. are going to try to intercept. They declare that the sub is going to intercept, the land-based air will attempt to intercept, and the naval units in Oahu will attempt to intercept. They don't have to declare them all at once. They could roll and see what the results are. And again, just as in the Japanese case, the air in Oahu can't actually reach the Midway area. So what happens? The sub fails its interception. Everyone else succeeds. You end up with a big naval battle. So you have the Japanese non-carrier surface fleet, 3 carriers, versus a larger U.S. surface fleet and 2 carriers. But with the U.S. land-based air, the U.S. actually has more air points. So the way combat is resolved, the first thing you do is you look at number of the air, you count them up. You don't have to move them to the map, you just count them, the total number of air points, and you resolve a round of air combat. Well, it did not go well for Japan. You can see they took 5 losses and an abort, whereas the American air only took 4 losses. And so what happened was the entire air wing of the Kaga got wiped out, the Zuihu got wiped out, and Zukaku lost pretty much effectively everything. One of them was aborted, but the other 1.5 air points were eliminated. For the Americans, effectively the Hornet lost its air component. The only thing left was a 1/2 strength air, a CV air. So, next is resolving the actual naval combat. Each side can choose whether they want to fight a carrier battle or a surface battle. Originally, Japan was thinking they were going to fight a carrier battle, but with the losses they took in the air combat, they felt it was better for them to choose surface. American, they wanted carriers. And then you roll to see who's able to choose the type of battle they want. In this particular case, Japan actually won the roll, and the first round of naval combat is going to be a surface. After each round, sides can disengage, or they can fight another round, and again they get to try to choose naval, air, or surface battle. You line up the one side's units. You designate who's firing at who. In this case, the Japanese cruisers are targeting an American cruiser. Japanese battleships are targeting a light cruiser. When all said is done, they inflict 6 damage on the CA2 and 11 damage on CL1. If you remember my other video, you have attack strength, defense strength. This is a 2 silhouetted unit, so there's 2 sides. So this 6 damage is going to eliminate the front side of this counter. This 11 damage is going to eliminate the front side of this counter and 5 damage is going to carry over onto the backside unit. Japan returns fire. They target the Japanese carriers with their battleships here and their other units here. You can see they inflict 10 damage on cruiser number 1, and they get a critical, and the critical results in actually 6 damage on this cruiser, which actually would kill the front side. So let's see what that looks like. So you see the 2 cruisers lost their front side and are flipped, as indicated by the reduced stripe, and the remaining damage carries over onto the back side. Japan decided it had enough, and so it chooses to disengage. Disengages are not automatic. You have to roll, and it could result in some units successfully disengaging, some units not, especially units that are heavily damaged. In this particular case, it's only 2 damage. It's less than half of its value on this side, so it's not slowed. But it can result that if you have more damage than half the defense value, you lose a factor of movement, and that could be the difference between whether you're able to successfully disengage or not with that specific unit. Japan succeeds in disengaging and run away. The next actions that Japan does is basically to take Northwest New Guinea and North New Guinea here. I won't go through the combat. They're pretty overwhelming. Against the defender, it's only the notional, which is basically just a 1 strength unit based on the control marker. So you can see there, actually this is a good example. When the control marker flips, it goes from a 1 strength, you remember on the previous slide, it's a 1 strength control marker, but when it's under Japan control, it's actually a 2 strength unit represented by the control marker. And then this is the combat taking over on Northwest New Guinea. So in the Allied turn, one of the first things they decide to do is, Japan is only 2 victory points from winning. There are 27 victory points. They need to get to 29. So there's concern obviously about Guadalcanal and some other areas, but Papua, with only this 1 defending unit, needs to be reinforced. So the Allies send a transport carrying an American division, and they escort it with 2 cruisers and some land-based air. Japan chooses to intercept with 2 cruisers, or a cruiser and a battleship of their own coming from Rabaul. So remember, air could only intercept into an adjacent area. So if there were these land-based air on Rabaul, could only intercept into the Bismarck Sea or to the Andaman Islands or over to Northeast New Guinea. There's also air straits here, so air could intercept over to Workenville. But naval units can intercept up to 2 areas away. So the first area would be Bismarck. Second area is down here in the Coral Sea. And up with a combat, both sides have surface units only. The land-based air get to attack. That's actually why you see 3 damage on the cruiser here. But they don't get to participate in the naval combat per se. So the only type of naval combat that can be chosen is a surface. And as you can see, critical actually was rolled on the American cruiser. 10, I think, was rolled for the damage from the battleship on this Australian cruiser, and both these ships are sunk. They do inflict more damage on this cruiser, doing 7 out of the 8 damage for the front side of this counter. So it's not without, Japan doesn't escape scot-free. And then there's a question. Obviously, with just the transport left, the Allies want to disengage and then hopefully get their transport to Papua when they disengage. This is not automatic. If they don't roll well enough and succeed in their disengagement, there's a very good chance this transport is going to get sunk. But unluckily for Japan, they make it through and are able to reinforce Papua with that unit. And then we look at the last round. There's some other movements the Allies do, but mainly just securing potential victory point areas. Since they know Japan is the onus of attack is on Japan right now. They need that 2 last victory points. So last turn, Japan is setting up to go after Solomons. And they need one more. Do they get it at Papua? Or do they get it in Southwest Australia? Or do they go after the victory points in Dutch Harbor or Attu? That they're not going after Midway. They already had their nose bloodied on that. Well, they decided to go after Guadalcanal and Bougainville. This is touch and go because the Allies have quite a large carrier force down in Fiji that can intercept and have a big combat in the Solomons. So Japan comes big. They bring in all their carriers. They have their transport coming in. Luckily for them, the Allies fail their interception role. So it essentially becomes a trivial operation. There's no real defense. And both Bougainville and Guadalcanal get taken by Japan. They then attack Western Australia into Southeast Australia, or Southwest, I forget which, and they bring a lot of strength. These units are damaged, so unfortunately it's not at full strength, but they really need to get a retreat result. If they don't get a retreat result, the best they can do is contest this area, which is worth half the victory points, but they need the full 1 victory point in order to win. The effect is a poor roll on the CRT by Japan. They end up only doing a little bit of damage to the Allied defenders. Combat's concluded. The net effect is they end up with 28.5 victory points. They needed 29 to win. So it definitely was a very tense scenario at the end. I know there's some things that could have been done differently. Japan probably should have looked at going after Papua earlier, or going after Attu or Dutch Harbor. Why they were able to. Perhaps going after Midway was a mistake, where they needed to get more carrier reinforcements to truck to support that before they went. Lots of different options that Japan could have done to potentially get that last half victory point. So hopefully you've enjoyed this brief overview of the introductory scenario for Oceans of Fire. Again, it's Compass Games and by designer Rob Bama. Thank you.